your heart. Your heart is safe with me here in the sacred union, here where our souls are free.
ธรรมะสวัสดีนะคะทุกท่านที่ชมอยู่ตอนนี้นะคะที่ธรรมศาลานะคะเราก็กำลังมีเซสชั่นเรากำลังเปิดเซสชั่นนะคะด้วยการภาวนากับเพื่อนต่างชาติที่มาจากหลากหลายประเทศมากเลยนะคะมีทั้งอินเดียฟิลิปปินส์ทั้งจากในเอเชียแล้วก็จากในยุโรปรวมถึงอเมริกาด้วยนะคะพวกเราก็ถึงแม้จะมีศาสนาหรือต่างชาติต่างภาษานะคะแต่เรามีหัวใจเดียวกันก็คือเรารักธรรมชาตินะคะซึ่งตอนนี้เราก็กำลังได้ภาวนาแล้วก็เพื่อที่จะนำเข้าการประชุมแรกนะคะซึ่งเราจะสนทนากันถึงเรื่องอะไรคะน้องรวม
ก็เซสชั่นแรกในวันนี้นะคะเราจะพูดคุยกันถึงอะไรคือผลกระทบในประเทศในแถบเอเชียที่กำลังเผชิญอยู่ตอนนี้ซึ่งเซสชันนี้สำคัญมากๆเลยค่ะเพราะว่าจะมีพี่คนไทยของเราได้ขึ้นไปช่วยพูดด้วยซึ่งจะนำโดยพระอาจารย์ชังจีมิสเตอร์มีฮามาธาจากอินเดียนะคะแล้วก็คุณหญิงเหลียงจากประเทศจีนแล้วก็พี่ปรัชญายงพัฒนาจากประเทศไทยนะคะแล้วก็จะมีคุณปริยาชาวลาอินเดียซันฮาคิมประเทศเกาหลีแล้วก็พระอาจารย์วินโซเวนชาค่ะ
ค่ะแล้วก็หลังจากจบเซสชันนี้นะคะตลอดวันนี้ก็เราก็จะมีการประชุมแล้วก็พูดคุยสนทนากันนะคะต่อด้วยประมาณเวลา 11:30 นถึงบ่ายโมงเนี่ยค่ะเราก็จะมีคุยในเรื่องหัวข้อรู้จักโลกรู้จักน้ำรู้จักดินนะคะซึ่งในหัวข้อนี้เราก็จะคุยถึงว่าเราจะสามารถที่จะเปลี่ยนแปลงความสัมพันธ์ของตัวเราค่ะที่มีต่อโลกและสิ่งแวดล้อมได้ยังไงบ้างนะคะจากภายในของเราจะมาตระหนักดูว่าธรรมชาติเราเนี่ยค่ะจากเดิมที่เราเคยมองว่าเราใช้ธรรมชาติเป็นสินค้าผลิตภัณฑ์ต่างๆเราจะเปลี่ยนว่าธรรมชาติเนี่ยค่ะเป็นสิ่งที่เป็นแหล่งพลังชีวิตของเรานะคะที่ช่วยให้เราดำรงอยู่ได้ยังไงบ้างนะคะค่ะซึ่งในเซสชันนี้นะคะก็จะมีการนำการพูดคุยด้วยสวามีนะคะแล้วก็ในคนที่เป็นชนพื้นเมืองจากสหรัฐอเมริกานะคะแล้วก็จะมีการร่วมสะท้อนให้ความเห็นจากเพื่อนหลายชาตินะคะตั้งแต่ฟิลิปปินส์อินเดียแล้วก็เคนยาค่ะหลังจากนั้นเราก็จะร่วมรับประทานอาหารกลางวันด้วยกันนะคะต่อด้วยเซสชั่นถัดไปคือจะเป็นการฟังแล้วก็เชื่อมโยงกันด้วยหัวใจนะคะซึ่งในเซสชันนี้นะคะเราก็จะมาทำความเข้าใจกันอย่างลึกซึ้งในเรื่องของความเชื่อมโยงแล้วก็พึ่งพาอาศัยกันนะคะแล้วเราก็จะมาดูว่าเราจะนำความเข้าใจนี้ค่ะมาจัดการกับสภาพอากาศแล้วก็วิกฤตการณ์ทางนิเวศวิทยาได้ยังไงบ้างนะคะซึ่งในเซสชันนี้ก็จะมีการพูดคุยจากมูลนิธิยูเรเชียจากสวิตเซอร์แลนด์นะคะรวมถึงนักวิชาการจากศรีอรพินโทประเทศอินเดียค่ะแล้วหลังจากนี้เราจะมีทำอะไรต่อคะน้องรวม
หลังจากนี้วันนี้จะมีเด็กๆน้องๆจาก ISB นะคะพาเดินชมบ้านเราว่าบ้านเรามีกิจกรรมอะไรมั่งนะคะก็ยังไงเดี๋ยวเข้าร่วมประชุมกันเลยนะคะ
ขอบคุณค่ะ
We've had a change of plans. Something has emerged. And so I want to kind of set the intention for where we're going to go this morning. we have some distractions with the construction and just being outside, so it's going to take a concerted effort for us to bring our energy together. And I'm also concerned about acoustics. So if it's not working, if you can't hear me, I think we all need to speak slowly. If you can't hear me, let me know. You all got the program, but you know programs are designed in a vacuum. And then when you come together, the energy shifts. So we've decided to combine the two sessions this morning. And these four, you can't see her, but this is Swamiji here. She will manifest soon, I hope. These four are going to lead a discussion on mindsets we need to shed, and in other words, decolonizing the mind, part one. Part two is regrooving the brain, building new mindsets. These were the two questions that I posed yesterday. How do we shed the way of thinking that has led us to our current situation? And how do we create new ways of thinking that will lead us out of the situation? And then in the afternoon, Lisi and I will talk about deepening our understanding of cause and effect and of interdependence, because in order to create the thinking that's needed, we need to understand these basic universal principles in their deepest sense, not in the superficial sense, like economies are interconnected, but in a much deeper sense. So I'm just been told that we're being broadcast to many countries, and this is a rather sensitive conversation, mindsets we need to shed, the decolonization of the mind. But it's a first step to rebuilding the new, and then the ultimate goal, which we'll have on Saturday, is the process of visioning and manifesting. So first you've got to deal with the thought patterns. Many of them are unconscious and subtle. And so part of the spiritual process is to become aware of how they manifest at their subtlest levels. First you look at how they manifest in the obvious ways, then how do they manifest at the subtlest levels. And I hope these are our four who are going to lead this discussion. Those of you who are listed to make comments, don't worry. They'll pose questions to you, and all of these issues. I mean, this is kind of like getting at the underlying issues that have led us to the climate ecological crisis. Are there any questions or comments? So I'm going to pass this to Chungji. Well, they have designed this, so I'm passing it.
Maybe we need to make the sound louder because...
Make the sound louder. Do you know how to do that?
It's not sound louder, it's the settings. I've told them to cut the bass, push up the treble. They cannot understand.
I've asked if they could quiet for a few hours, and I think that maybe they will. If it's a problem, if we have to continue this discussion in another space, we can, because it's very important that we stay very concentrated on this subject.
Can you understand what we're saying? Yeah, okay.
The mic is soft.
It's
Hold
muddy.
it closer? Is that better? Do I have to repeat everything? Okay. We're going to start with an invocation.
Om Ya Devi Stuyate Nityam Vibudhair Vedaparagaihi Sa Me Vasatu Jihvagre Brahmarupa Saraswati Brahmarupa Saraswati.
I give them this to them. Actually, this one can hold it with the...
For the discussion this morning, our intention is to go deep into root causes. The problem with deep discussion is often what we consider to be root cause is not it. It's much better now. It's fine. Yeah, it's much better. We can, for example, speak of the problems today ultimately going back to greed, anger, hatred, desire. These are universal root causes of all human problems. We could say that all of the problems of climate change, destruction of environment, and the misery and suffering and the collapse of civilization is because of these things. Yes, it would be true, of course. But a deeper question would rise, why is it this has not happened before? Human nature has always been what it is. It has always had greed, hatred, anger, and all the rest. Why is it that we see this extraordinary destructive phase in humanity only in the last 100 years or so? And that's where we need to go deeper to see what it is that has changed. First of all, if you observe the pattern behind the destruction, we see something very distinctive shaping in the world in a period about 200 years ago. And I'm giving this more as an indication. We're going to be saying many things which are intended to provoke thought. Okay? They may not always be entirely accurate. We want you to think about it and perhaps revert with corrections as we go along. But we are going to provoke you. We're perhaps going to shake you out of a position of comfort, a zone of comfort, perhaps get you upset, perhaps get you angry, perhaps get you confused also. So just be prepared for that. It's all part of the game. There's a period about 200 years ago when we see something emerging in the world which was not so prevalent before. That spread with colonization into the rest of the world until it became the common meme of humanity. And it is this spread of the memes which are at the root cause of the current destructive, exaggerated destructive turn of humanity. I'm going to point to 4 things which to me seem the most crucial of the memes. There are probably others which you will come up with, and others will share their views. But there were 4 memes which particularly took an exaggerated turn in Europe about 200 years ago at the dawn of the industrial age. 2 of the memes came from science. 2 of them came from the religious teaching of that period. In the religious teaching of the period in Europe, the church declared that certain parts of humanity were not human. Africa, for example, was fair game for Europe to conquer, to colonize, and to turn the people of Africa into slaves. It was a declared position of the church. They did not have souls, so the church said. Now this defined a whole new turn in the colonial process and in the relationship of human being with human being, especially when it had the sanction and the power of the church to back it. Some of this was supposedly justified on the basis of quotations from the Bible. Again, that is questionable whether it's actually justified. But the fact is, it was so accepted, it was so declared. It is this pattern which also extended into the colonization in the Americas, where the colonizers had a right to destroy those whom they conquered because they were not human. They could be reduced to slaves. This is very disturbing for us to think about, and we're not here trying to put blame. We're trying to capture a pattern because the pattern continues today in different ways, under different guises, under different terms. We may not use the word colonization, we use other words which do not sound like colonization, which sound like something good and safe and nice, but which actually convey the same thought, the same meme. Okay? So this is the first meme with which we see suddenly the whole balance of what is human being changed. The second meme that came from the religious discourse of the period in Europe was that, and again it was referring to the Bible, quoting from the Bible, to say that God has given you the authority to rule everything on earth and do what you want with it. And this was used to justify the exploitation of nature. The relationship set with nature by the church teaching of that age was exploitation. Now, this is not to say that exploitation didn't exist before, but here it had sanction of an entire institutional power. And with that, it spread with a certain force of violence. Anything that, when you see the Europeans entering in Americas, they had a right to look at a property and say, this is mine because I first marked it and I first saw it. The people living there did not count. Nature, which had been nurtured for thousands of years, did not matter. It was my property because I saw it and I named it. The laws were even modified and to this day exist in those parts of America which say that if somebody else walks into my property, I have a right to shoot the person. And these were laws set at that time for the colonial purpose. Now, I'm pointing to a mindset which has not changed. These laws have not been questioned. They have not been revised in the present environment, which means that thinking process is still going on. It takes more complex forms and are hidden more carefully. So these two memes came from religion. Two other memes came from science. You see, when European science took a hard materialist turn, it broke away from religion in reaction to religion, and therefore discarded everything that came with the religion, including the good as well as the bad. And one of the things it discarded was the whole reality of something greater than the material. The whole realm of the spiritual, the realm of the deeper psychological truths, all were thrown out. Matter was one thing the church could not touch. And so science, with an aggressive turn, seized on materialism as its basis. Now, science need not be materialistic. Science can be more encompassing and more complete. But this was the form it took in Europe. And as a result, the deduction of science in observing material processes was that evolution takes place, first of all, by chance. And that means molecules fall into place by chance. By chance, the cells are formed. By chance, we have grown to be what we are. By chance, the flower is beautiful. By chance, the deer leaps with great joy. By chance, you are thinking, and therefore it has no meaning. That's the implication when you say everything is by chance. Except that if you question this thought process more deeply, ask yourself, what do you mean by chance? Who controls chance? When I throw a die, I spin and it falls, it hits 4. You say by chance. What does it mean? The word by chance is the word, a label we use to replace ignorance. Where I don't know, I put a label that says by chance. I don't know how 4 came because I don't know enough about the forces involved, so it happened by chance. You won the lottery by chance because you didn't know the actual facts. It's your ignorance that you cover up with this label called by chance. So basically what science was teaching was, we don't know why, but somehow life came to be. We don't know why, somehow you're thinking. We don't know why, and we don't want to know, basically. But it means, it implied, it is aimless, it is meaningless, it's all by chance. Now suddenly the value of life, the purpose of life, to which religion had given a lot of importance, was replaced by nothing. And this, with a hard materialistic turn, meant the only purpose left for life was satisfy your instinct, baser instincts, greed, desire, passions, anything which gives you momentary pleasure and satisfaction, short-term satisfaction, pleasure. That was the turn to which inevitably the civilization had to take once you accept this premise of science. The fourth meme, or the second of science, was that in this process of evolution, well, it all started by chance, it's still driven by chance, meaning we don't know. There is still a process of selection, which Darwin called natural selection. And the process of selection was basically this, that in nature there is a huge competition. Everything is out to destroy everything else. The lion is going to eat the deer is going to eat the grass, and between two families of deer, whichever is stronger will eat the grass and push out the other and eliminate the other. And the whole picture presented by this evolutionary theory was that the nature of evolution is destructive competition, where the strongest wins by destroying the weakest. And implied in that was, since this is the natural process of evolution, it is good if the weak is destroyed. It is good if the strongest dominates. It is good if it is healthy even, it is normal. It was this thinking, incidentally, which was the basis for the First and Second World Wars in Europe, where an elite, a race that considered itself an elite, had the right to dominate a less developed race and turn them either into slaves or even eliminate them from existence. Because that's nature, that's evolution, remember? And this, again, has to be questioned. Is that true? Now, it was convenient to state it thus then. Perhaps it was a first observation. In fact, Darwin himself questions this in his later years. But that's not what's taught. To this day, what's taught is competitive, destructive evolution, survival of the fittest, okay? In fact, when you observe nature, look around you everywhere, and the richest diversity of nature is based not on destructive competition, but on collaboration. The creeper leans on the bigger tree to climb and grow. The big tree gives shade to the smaller plants so that they can grow in safety. It gives safety to the nest for the birds. And there's a huge, deep, complex interdependence in the forest. So complex that if you cut a road right through the rainforest, one side of the rainforest dies out because there used to be a small species of beetle which was migrating to the other side to pollinate the flowers and come back every year. And the highway cut across their migrating path. That's the fragile character of the complex interdependence. You do not see destructive competition. So this meme, which was so exaggerated by the materialistic concept of evolutionary science, was a significant cause for justifying destruction among human beings. Now you can see how this took certain forms in colonization. During colonization, all these ideas came together in a massive push for global domination. The First World War, in fact, was fought in Europe. It was not a world war, it was a European war. But it was called a world war because it was fighting over the colonies all over the world. Over control of colonies, because colonies represented wealth. By what? This process of domination. By this process of hard materialistic sense of superiority, inferiority, and the right to dominate and exploit. Now this thinking has not ended, the point I'm getting at. The age of colonization may have passed, but the thinking has not changed. What earlier were countries in Europe colonizing, today are multinationals. And the beauty of this multinational is they're not bound to any country. You cannot pinpoint, you cannot identify them. They're often a complex web of companies which are interdependent, whose control is hidden behind many layers. And if you block them in one country, they pop up somewhere else and continue exactly what they were doing. And they are answerable to nobody. Because they straddle laws across borders. You know how this works, of course, even with a company like Apple, which has headquarters in Ireland. Do you know why? Because it's convenient for the taxations. And it skips between loopholes between two different laws across two different countries for benefit. Which is fine as far as it concerns taxes, but when it comes to accountability of policies, They are accountable to nobody. That mindset continues even today. So when you stand up and you want to fight against something wrong, against destruction of the environment, against a decision taken by a company or a country or whatever, who are you fighting? Often the entity that's before you is only a puppet, not the real force. The mindset behind which is driving these is exactly the same as it was then. And it is this which we have to start questioning. Consider the 4 memes and consider how deeply they are rooted within us. When I had raised this issue in Europe recently in a meeting that we had, the moment I questioned this Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest by destructive competition, one of our participants was very upset and he said, "Are you questioning evolution itself?" And to me that pointed to how deeply rooted the association of evolution is with destructive competition. We cannot, or we have taught to think of evolution only in terms of destructive competition, when in fact it is not. It is constructive collaboration. That's not what your textbooks teach you. From childhood, you have been brainwashed into living in destructive competition. The whole educational system has taught you that if you have to be first, the other 99% have to be not first, less, inferior, failed. In India, we have a board called the Board for Education. There are a couple of boards. CBSE is one of them. There was a public meeting. One of the members of the board, I don't name him now, was asked, how do you explain 40% dropout rate in early schooling in India? And he said, they don't count. You see the thinking? When 40% of the children drop out of the system because of the perversion of the system, not for any fault of theirs, the head of the board says, they don't count, they don't matter, it's only the ones who get through that matter. It is this thinking of destructive competition which has so seeped us that we have begun to value ourselves in those terms. If I do not get that label, if I do not get that trophy, if I do not get that stamp on a paper that says I am whatever, then I am nobody. I am left out. And we have been taught to run after these symbols. The symbols themselves have no value. Now you see, once you've programmed an entire society to chase after fictitious symbols, it's very easy to play them. If you turn to the things teenagers watch on television, you go to MTV or whatever those channels are, there's a whole show that says, what's in, what's out, let me tell you, in your fashion. So current fashion, I'm telling you, is this color, this pattern, these are the things you should go out and buy now. And what happens to the young children? They've already been brainwashed into thinking in these terms. I need to be ahead of the pack, so I need to buy that product which I've been told by TV is in before the other one gets it, so I can flaunt how much I'm in, then they are out. And it actually works. The whole fashion industry is driven by creating these fake fashion drives, seasons, and modes. Okay? All of this is so deeply steeped in us and is at the very root of the current crisis. Now, human greed was always there. Human greed is still there within the system, but it has been amplified and perverted to such a degree and even justified in certain ways that we do not even see it. If, as a result of such a brainwash, such a programming of society, you're taught to be blind to the reality, it serves even better to those who play the game, so to say. Now, when we look at industries, who is responsible at the end of the day? The board for what? For profits. Of what? Next quarter. They don't care whether what they're giving you is healthy for you or for the environment or whether it's sustainable. It's next quarter. I'm not talking about next 10 years. It doesn't matter if you make profit after 10 years. It's the next quarter we want. This thinking now, short-term thinking, has become so steeped that in order to survive the next quarter, you're willing to do anything, including sell junk, including state falsehoods in the name of advertising and promotion, whatever the cost. Now let me give you an example. There is a particular product which women use for scrubbing their face. And in order to give a good scrub, they put tiny beads of plastic into this cream. When you wash it off after scrubbing, all those plastic beads go into the water. They're too fine to be filtered out. They go into the lakes, into the rivers, into the oceans. And as plastic, they decompose and all the rest follows. This company cannot be held accountable because whom will you arrest? On what grounds? People who are using the product don't even know it contains plastic. And the destruction goes on. The food that's given to you again, if it makes you sick, it is the same investors who are now funding the pharmaceutical companies which make the profit. And you can play with these terms. Make people sick on the one side in the long term, and then on the other side feed them more medicines, and you make money from both sides. It's like the banks during the Second World War. They were funding both sides of the war. Didn't matter who won. They were making money either way. There's an intention, there's a perversion at the top in the controlling systems because of short-term thinking. For survival of the fittest, for destruction of the other so that you can be stronger and survive. This thinking is so shot through the entire economic system, the entire political system, the educational system, the governance structures, everything is steeped with this thinking. Where will you start the change? When you look at the gridlock that has taken place in humanity, it's so steeped, so deep, it almost seems as if impossible to defeat. Where will you start the change? And that's what we are here to discuss. And it's not enough that we say, all right, we will start with ourselves. We had a very interesting meeting. It was in another meeting in Europe where a few people, they were semi-monastics, they kept saying, the only solution is we should go back and purify our hearts, purify our minds, free ourselves from desires, and become egoless. And somebody on the other side, also from a different tradition, he said, wonderful. The bank owners will say, go ahead, please go and purify yourself while we continue to loot you and your society. It's not enough that we say we start with ourselves. We have also to be active. We have also to be proactive. But against what? And it's not clear because the whole problem is a tautology. If you say that the problem is the industry or the economy, go back a step and you'll say, well, it's political problems which allow this economic change. Go to the politics. The problem of politics is you don't have good people in politics. So you need good people to get in. Why don't good people get in? Because it's corrupt. Again, a tautology. So you need to have better education. In order to have a better education, you need to train the teachers to think differently. How long will that take? You pass another 2 generations. Oh, the problem is the media. It is through media that we can educate most rapidly. But the media is under control of the very same companies that you're fighting. And you know this for a fact, in the US, all the major media channels are controlled by what is called the military-industrial complex. The same people who produce arms, who need to have wars in the world so that their bottom line and the next quarter results can be high, are controlling the media. Where will you get a clear picture of what's really happening? You see the gridlock that we are bound in. It's a hall of mirrors that is created. Okay. So I'm going to leave this to you, not with a solution, but as a starting point for a discussion, showing you certain deeper causes of the problem. There'll be other causes also, and I'll invite Changji to continue from here.
Okay, so what we are trying to do here is to throw something into the center for you to think about. When we say science, what Shradulu was saying too is basically trying to uncover all these unexamined assumptions that is guiding our evolution. So what's the definition of evolution? Survival of the fittest, that everything is a competition. So there is an unexamined assumption here. What is it? We could talk about this and try to see what we can uncover. If you could uncover all these unexamined assumptions, then that's when we can deconstruct and build something different, right? So, you know, when we talk about science, science is just explanation, right, of what situations are, what reality is. There's actually no meaning behind science. It's just an explanation. So how can we fill in all the missing pieces to give it meaning, to give life meaning? Because our life is, oh, thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay, because life is more than just survival. So what is our meaning of life? Let's think about this a little bit. And that, you know, evolution, nature is violent, that it's competition. This uncovers something else of an unexamined assumption that guides all the institutions today, that guides how we have been conditioned. So when Shradulu was talking about religions, he's not talking about the theology of the religions. It's more like what Tiokasan said yesterday. It's about how we language in all these unexamined assumptions, these mindsets. So let's think about this and let's see what comes up in the discussion. All right, so yeah, how do we, let's uncover some of these, you know, mindsets first and see how it goes. Questions? Okay, so let's pose this question to me here, since you're the systems person.
I can't walk. You'll have to. Yeah, that's fine. You hold this?
I'm still trying to reflect on the long discussion, on the long, not discussion, but the story that Shraddhalu narrated. So, am I audible? Can you hear me, all of you? Okay, good. So let me take a moment of silence to just reflect on what has just happened.
You know, Mihir, like one example that you were talking about yesterday, planetary boundaries, right? And if we increase our GDP, it actually means we're getting closer to exceeding our safe operating space. Let's start from there and see what comes up. If anyone else have any, like feel compelled to share, just raise your hands, okay? We'll pass the mic to you.
Sure. So, just taking...
Here, one moment, would you before, since you've taken the example of GDP, I'm going to throw a provocative idea. I'll give you a solution for doubling the GDP of your country overnight, okay? With doing nothing else. You're all cooking food at home to eat it for yourself, right? So we make a pact. Every neighboring house will make a pact. The food we cook, we will sell to the neighbor, and the food they cook, they will sell to me. Okay? And that now being accounted in the gross national product, because we're selling it and we're accounting, we're billing it and it's being taxed, suddenly your GDP will double. You see the stupidity of this whole concept of GDP? What are you measuring? The intangibles are often more valuable than the tangibles that you're measuring. And the concept of GDP itself comes into question when you think of it like this. And so these are all things, memes which have been imposed on us to make us run after something which is further breaking down the social values, where there was a time when you gave food for free, it will never be counted in the GDP. And such a country will appear to be poor when in fact everybody is happy, no one's going hungry. Okay? So please go on.
Right. So let me start from where Shraddhalu had started. He was talking about a story which started 200 years back. So if you look at human beings population in year 1800, we were about 1 billion. And human population on earth never really managed to cross 1 billion till about year 1800. Now we are 7 plus billion. So what happened in 200 years that we grew from 1 billion to 7 billion, which has never ever happened before? Our GDP since then has grown 72 times. So that's a massive explosion which has happened. You see, the planetary boundaries that we were talking about yesterday, they are getting breached now, is because human beings have managed to uncover a vast source of energy which we did not have access to before. Most of our work was either by human power or by animal power, draft labor, maximum up to some amount of charcoal being made by wood. But when we've managed to discover fossil fuels and oil specifically, it empowered us to start going deeper into Earth's crust, exploiting the minerals and metals which are formed over millions and billions of years. One person can feed thousands of people by using mechanized farming methods. We are able to increase our soil's productivity artificially by producing fertilizers and pesticides, which is nothing else but derivatives of fossil fuels and chemicals. So in the last 200 years, we have systematically stripped Earth's resources by using this massive, ancient source of energy, fossil fuels, which in itself was formed over 170 million years of chemical reaction. The question is, what happens if we start running out of those fossil fuels? How are we going to feed 7 billion plus population while your primary productivity of the soil has already gone down? How do you sustain your lives when the planet is going to be warmer by 2+ degrees Celsius? And that's the average rise in temperature. Some parts are going to go up by 10, 15, 20 degrees Celsius. What's our plan? How do we fund ourselves if the cheap flow of energy is over? So we have not really thought about it. That's the whole problem. And even the sustainable ways of living that we are contemplating about, using alternative energy and solar and hydro, the mindset has not really changed. We are still in pursuit of the infinite growth, and we want to use the alternative ways of living, alternative energy sources to fund our growth, to fuel our growth, to increase our GDP and the standard of living.
Right, Mihir, when you say growth, would you like to define what growth means?
So when I say growth, this is basically every person wants to increase the material position that they have.
More stuff.
More stuff, more of what we already have. So there is a difference between standard of living, which is in focus right now, and we want to increase our standard of living and GDP and purchasing power parity and all those things. And then there is quality of life, which is much more than just the amount of money or income that you have. But in the last 200 years or more, the whole focus has moved from quality of life to standard of living. But now we are reflecting, saying, oh my God, we are living in the most polluted cities of the world. We are earning more, but we can't breathe. And we have water shortages, water cuts, because the ammonia level in water has gone up. So the standard of living per se, we can say is going up, but where is the quality of life? But we don't measure quality of life, and that's the whole problem with measurements. We don't measure what we can't measure, but that's what counts. So if you're not measuring what counts, then you're directionless. It's pretty much a mindless trajectory of growth that we are pursuing. So we are compromising the quality of life in our quest to increasing standard of living, and we are burning endless amounts of fossil fuels, leading to climate change and, of course, breaching of planetary boundaries.
Right. So thank you, Mihir, because I wanted to give time to also other people for reflections. So growth here is the definition of a standard of living. So what's the mindset that's behind this standard of living? We're pursuing this during that time. Is there any other mindsets that we can reveal? And there's I can't remember your name, but I think you're from the Philippines.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rodney.
I'm from the Philippines, and
Rodney.
On top of our indigenous people's tradition, we belong also to the Christian tradition. And the challenge for the church, of the Western church, as our mentor said, is the unexamined assumption. The unexamined assumption. I was formed in a seminary for around 4 to 6 years to become a priest. And I was unable to continue, and if you may ask me, let's sit down later on. Why? But I'm struck of that comment. 10 years ago, I found myself in front of the board of directors of the world's largest nickel mining company, BHP Billiton, and also they are in the extractives. And that was because in 2007, my companion in the anti-mining advocacy in the island was shot to death by the security officer. And he wanted to save that island. We live in between two protected areas, literally, and they wanted to mine that island. Later on, in 2009, I was invited in the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. I was not a theologian, I'm not a theologian, but I was invited to converse with them for systematic theology. But in that session, they call it heuristic session, we were asked, how would the church respond to ecological crisis? There were different Christian groups, faith groups during that session. And I asked myself, yes, how? That very moment, in connection to that unexamined assumption, one of the philosophers, Greek philosopher, would say, an unexamined life is not worth living. I went through within like, okay, how? And perhaps you are right, because the Christian tradition for centuries had that unexamined assumption that human beings are on a pedestal. That's that anthropocentric human, that being, and theocentric connected to that. We forgot what really the message of the Bible was. And I found out in that contemplation, because we always have this song, Jesus is in me and Jesus is in us, Jesus is in us for he loves us. Like within, it's in here. Then there was this question. It took us to the story of creation. And I was taught in the seminary that creation comes from the Latin word creatio, which means from nothing. And that human beings were created. And deep inside me again, from like in the Bible, from day 1 to day 6, all of these things, all things bright and beautiful. But at that very moment, when that very soil, that very earth, that very dirt was transformed into human beings, I've told myself, oh no, we were not created. That's an unexamined assumption, because human beings were not created, and the Creator transformed to become a maker, because we came from that very universe, that very planet, all of this. And for the church, in order for us to address this ecological crisis, is to recognize that we come from this earth, not a sort of magic. And with the language, I found out in Hebrew there were 4 words used. Rada, Kabash, Abad, Shamar. Rada, have dominion. But dominion means if you're a king, you need to have authority and responsibility to the kingdom. Not only to your subjects, but to all. Kabash means subdue. It means let it be. Let nature be. Rada is to take care of the garden. Abad is to take care of the garden, to till it. And Shamar is to exercise great care over. And at the end of the day, when that responsibility was given, in Greek, oikos' household, and that when that responsibility was given, nomos, is management, is rule, is management of the household. And human beings, as part of nature, We're not given that economic authority to subdue or have dominion or to abuse the law of supply and demand, the investment, the capital. No. It is to maintain the balance of this earth, being great economists. And that's the real meaning of economy. Stewardship.
Thank you, Rodney. It's beautiful. Anyone else would like to join in this conversation or toss something into the circle? Something that you're grappling with, something that you're feeling right now. You could just toss this into the circle. The thing is, you know, the circle is a pregnant space of I don't know, and let's see what emerges.
I like to just share a story that comes to my mind when we are hearing about these topics. It's about Alexander the Great. So while Alexander the Great, along with his army, was trying to conquer the world, he chanced to happen upon the banks of River Indus. What Alexander used to do is, in the night, he used to find the way to move ahead, and he'll ask his army to stop and rest. So during the nightfall, Alexander is trying to figure out how to cross the river. So he's walking along the banks of the river, and he looked around a tree, and there was a man who was sitting over there. He looked around a tree, and there was a man sitting over there. The man was just sitting idle in the pose of a meditation. Alexander walked up to him, and he's like, "Hey man, what are you doing with your life?" The man opened his eyes, and he's like, "Brother, who are you?" So Alexander was shocked for the first time. Alexander said, "You don't know who I am? I'm Alexander the Great." The man said, "All right, nice to meet you. What do you do here?" Alexander is like, "I came here to win over your land." Man is like, "Okay, but what are you going to do then?" "Then I'm going to go to the rest of the world and I'm going to conquer that." "All right, what are you going to do then?" "Then I'm going to go back to my home and rest." The man says, "You're going to do so much of bloodshed and then going to rest. I'm sitting here without killing anyone and resting." So sometimes whatever we do, whatever we think, why do we need anything in life, the materialism, we always say we want peace, we want liberation, we want nirvana. But it's not about that. Whatever you need, you work towards that. So if you're looking for a life of luxury, you go for materialism. If you're going for a life of peace, that can be achieved right now. Somewhere deep inside, we are hypocritical with ourselves. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else would like to throw in their Lee? Remember to put the microphone close to your mouth like you're eating an ice cream.
All right, good. Yeah, good morning, guys. I just heard some few keywords. First of all is surviving. So back to the basic, everything back to the basic for me is we work for survive depending on how much income we have, or what we work for the income is for something or surviving. This is the first question. And the second thing is about GDP. Okay. Or is about more to and private company, organizations, or the governments, more profit to them is good. But how about people like us? Is the GDP important for us? I don't think so. To me, maybe something that we need is very limited. And the media is doing very good thing, and even the marketing is doing very good in their responsibility to make you think something is really important to you, but there is something that extra that will make you feel that you really need it. But we don't want that. We don't want the extra actually. So like what we eat today, we only have one breakfast a day, one lunch and one dinner. There's only one portion. But the media we're telling you, you have to get more like vitamins. The original vitamin where we got is from the meal that we have every day. Do you need extra vitamin from the pill? That's not necessary. So for the GDP, they will make more products, make you feel you need it, but actually a lot of things that we do not. So this is what kind of GDP that I know, that I understand. From a view from me is what we need is very less, but they will make you feel that you got to buy more things to boost up the GDP and profit to the government and to the company. But as a layman, we don't need more. What we need is actually very basic, like living, just eat is not much. The human greed, if you need more, and we only make more destructions to the Mother Earth and more resource that we waste. Yeah, I mean, I just catch up from the few of the keywords and just think back to the basic. That's it.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, hold on to the microphone. Could you pass it to Ying beside you? Now, Ying, in the pursuit of a higher standard of life, what has happened in China itself with, climate change and other issues that probably might have emerged? Would you like to share a little bit about that? Or if something else you want to talk about?
I would like to share like what you just touched on, kind of an emergent group of people, especially young people, who are very brave to go against the current. Like everyone is moving to the city and work really hard in order to be able to buy the apartment in the city, for example. And another group of young people, they choose to move back to their hometown where they are originally from, and to work on the land with the elders who are still living in the village. And they start to protect the land and rebuild the community in the countryside. And because they have been given a lot of wisdom from the soil, from the land, they start to have this, like, even though they are very young, but they start to become the elders, so that other young people who are struggling in the city, suddenly they stop and they kind of felt compelled by these young people, why we are in the same age, why they could make such a difficult choice and take on such a big step to do what they feel it is right for them, for the community, and for the land. So sometimes we feel like, oh, maybe in Europe and in the States, a lot of the like the organic movement and eco-village movement, they are driven by elders, by the people who see such a big change in these 50 years. But in China, there are some young people that they are, even though they are not rich, they are not material rich, but they are, I don't know, coming like just be born out of a rock or be born out of the land, and they just pursue that journey. That is what I witnessed. And
thank you. So they discovered different purpose in life. Before I pass, okay, hang on a second. Before I pass the mic, I'd like to have Shveta. I have to make sure I pronounce names right. Shveta. Right. Did I get it right? No, wrong.
Changji, could I saw her hands, hands. So maybe she has something to add on in the Chinese situation.
Right, let's have her share and then you.
Sorry, just to add a little bit as answering to Dina's question. So, as people are aware, after Chairman or President Xi Jinping has came to power, China has been very strong in the global world, both in climate change and in economy and other issues. And the thing is, many people from economic or financial background know the term "too big to fall," and that's basically what Chinese economy is facing now. Because during the of rapid economic development, China has achieved an economic miracle in the world of annual growth of close to 10% GDP growth. But what does this really mean? Right now, more than half of Chinese population live in the city, and that's a tremendous growth. If you consider 50 years ago, only less than 1/3 of the population are citizens. All of the rest are farmers. So in the past, like 20 years, China has achieved economic miracle in cost of massive scale environmental destruction, in terms of natural resource extraction, environmental pollution, and in many scales. And second is in cost of a great social change. How do you say? Every day, more than 200 nature villages disappear in terms of people move away from village and move into the city. And in the city, the biggest scale of construction happens in China for the past decade. More than half of the world concrete and cement are produced and consumed in China alone. Half of our GDP came from construction and all the production chain. And the thing is, people know this is not right. My friend graduated from college and working for the ministry has to overwork at least 10 hours a week for the past 10 years, and some company works more. And all the people from the government senior to the company leader, I used to work for a company which is top 100 on the stock market. The leader of the company has no idea where he will be the first day of next month or even next Monday, because the whole market has generated such a fast pace that nobody is in control of that. This is a problem, and even Chairman Xi has proposed this concept of ecological civilization. But nobody really knows where to go. As Shadoru just said, we have deeply embedded into this old concept of colonization, anthropogenism, and science, and so on. Even if we know it's not right, but people don't know where to go. I just talked to the regional government officials recently, and they're really confused. They have the money. Right now, even one county level government will have about 1 billion RMB at a budget annually, but they don't know where to spend the money. So the central government gives them this compulsory task to fulfill, like to elevate poverty, compulsory elevation of poverty by 2020. But then where to go? And then to develop a rural complex, the rural development, urbanization and ecological civilization, under which there are different branches, ecological governance, ecological finance, and so on. They don't know how to do it. So the government has a really beautiful, nicely drafted development goal for the ecological civilization, but it comes to the provincial government. When they receive this task, they do not know how to build it. For instance, every provincial government in China now are compulsory to develop this called the nature capital balance sheet. From company, there's a capital balance sheet for every company. And right now, every government, provincial government, are obligated to develop a natural capital balance sheet. So in order to assess the natural capital, which is environmental resource in this region, and to see the change along the time, they have to develop such a capital balance sheet. But nobody knows how to do it. The government authority, CAI, Chinese Academy of Science, or Tsinghua University, none of the authority could be able to provide such a guideline of how to develop such assessment tool. So this is a problem we're facing. We know it's not right. From the central government to regional government, from the high business world, we know it's not right, but it's just it's too big to shift and too big to fall. And even if we propose this ecological civilization, just the end of last year, Chairman Xi talked in this parliament meeting of we put the welfare of people first, and that's the #1 goal, that's people's welfare. And the same month, in 3 days, Beijing alone has evacuated 3.2 million people. So those are called illegal residents in the capital because they do not have a Beijing citizen ID card, but they have provided the most basic labor service, from city cleaning, from the food stall, from the babysitting, and all the basic work which Beijing citizens do not want to do. They all do it. But Beijing has grown so big, and in order to keep the city functioning, so we have still water and fuel and so on, the government has to evacuate 3 million people. So it was -5 degrees outside at the end of November, and those 3 million people are cut off with electricity and water and heating. And if they do not move, the city police will break their door and window and throw their belongings on the street. So in this way, in 3 days, Beijing evacuated 3 million people just 1 week after Chairman Xi talked on the TV about we put people's welfare the first hand. So everyone in China right now is feeling very insecure, no matter it's a government official or rich businessman or student or just the young graduates, because you do not know what to rely on. The government can say this, but they act like this. And the market look like this today, and it's totally different tomorrow. You may have a high-paid job today, and you may lose it tomorrow. So people feel very confused and insecure. That's why it encourages them to grab more. And the government is encouraging people to return to their hometown, because first, the big cities do not have the capacity to host any more citizens. It's true. And the second is the villages are disappearing. Yeah, and a lot of old cultures and traditions and sustainable lifestyle disappear along with it. And so right now, the #1 central government document, which just released last month, called the 中央1号文件, has talked about encouraging the young graduate to return to the home and create job at their hometown. This is really a desperate move from the economic will, because the city was the #1 development goal, but it's not able to continue anymore. And right now, the development focus has shifted from urbanization to rural urbanization. So yeah, this is basically the current crisis China is facing. And I don't think they're really bad people in power. I think they're just people very confused, and they're eagerly thirsting for the good solution. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think you brought up also some important issues here. The thing is, we know it's wrong, but we don't know what to do. It is also a great opportunity at this age where we can all contribute to redefining what's purpose. Right, it gives you an opening, so it's not like a bad thing, it's also an opportunity. I'm just going to pass this to Shradalu to comment before we come to Suwaita, right? I still keep getting the name wrong.
Okay, I just want to make a few quick comments after your observations about China, and I will link it to also what's happening in India. You see, both China and India, with all good intentions, to give common man a reasonably good, comfortable lifestyle, Both these countries replicated the Western model of development, the industrial model of development, which has not only created this great destruction of the environment, but has driven society to the brink of collapse and even, I will say, psychiatric problems. In America, 50% of the people are visiting psychiatrists. For what? Because of stress-related and other mental issues. And in India, as it used to be, 30 years ago barely, you didn't need psychiatrists. Because when you had a problem, you went to grandma. And you put your head on her lap and cried a little, and she caressed your head and said, "Don't worry, my child, it'll be all right." And she gave you some suggestion, some indication, which corrected the direction of your life. And the core of it was this: why are we doing what we are doing? Why are we working so hard, working those extra 10 hours to get money? To do what? Ask yourself this question. And it comes to one of the memes I've spoken of earlier. Life is by chance, has no purpose. And so you're taught to run after illusions which promise to satisfy your momentary impulse of desire, which can never be satisfied, because the moment you satisfy it, something else pops up which is bigger. Whereas if you go back, let's say 200 years, both for India and for China, China and India together were producing 50% of the global industrial output before they were colonized, before their existing system of economic and social development was completely destroyed and replaced by this failed model. And if we go back to that earlier framework, it was sustained over centuries. It did not drive people to suicide and to psychiatric problems. It gave them a chance to live life, enjoy life with meaning. And what is the core difference we need to ask? The sense of purpose of life. What is it you're working for? And if you say it is by chance, then of course all this mess comes. If you say life has a meaning and a purpose, what you define as your meaning and purpose then works backward to define the economic priorities, defining political and social developmental priorities, and the entire developmental model is recast around that single one idea. Not GDP growth, but something else more profound. And I'm pointing to this and to set a stage for what Shweta will speak to us about, perhaps economy. I was attracted to your statement in your bio that says you are really working hard to destroy the economic system as it is, to replace it with something better. But I'll just point to one of the great indicators that the economic system is so broken. Today, if you have a company's balance sheet, has to list the trees which are on the land, like the trees here, they would be listed in the column called liability. Because a tree means, a living tree means you have to pour water, you have to get fertilizer, it might be sick, it might get some fungus, it might be struck by lightning, it's a liability. If you cut all the trees, overnight that same liability goes into your assets as timber. It's something you can sell, it's a positive money. Now the current economic system teaches you that life is a liability, death is an asset. When this is at the root of the economic system, what will be the end result of its whole orientation? It will destroy life, as it is already doing.
So actually, basically, also another way of looking at this, there's an unexamined assumption here. What is it? It means Earth's resources are there for us to use as we see fit. If it harms us, we're going to try to find ways to get rid of it. If it benefits us, we will covet that. And if it doesn't do anything, we don't care what happens to it. So that's one of the unexamined assumptions that drives a lot of things that we do today. And we'll have you share about destroying economies. Where's the microphone?
It's here. Oh. Before I speak, can everybody hear me? Yeah? No? Okay. Sorry, can everybody hear me now? I'm going to put this down just for a second. I have a request. Can we just take a collective out breath? So just inhale and just, let that all out. if you were holding your breath, or if there was something that needed to just come out, just shake that out and just like, whew, let that was a lot of information and just getting that out of the system. Thank you for. Again, thank you for the hot seat. I didn't ask for it, but thank you. And I'm going to play the same game. I could tell you about scarcity and abundance. I could talk about gift culture. I could talk about transition towns. I could talk about local economies and traditional knowledge and vanishing livelihoods, which is all work that I do. But I actually have a request to our elders and everybody here. One of the things that we've talked about is, again, going inward, and I think that for me, the idea of climate change brings up a lot of fear. What's going to happen? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And a lot of the times I feel like I'm working in isolation. You feel alone. I feel alone in the world. But when I come to spaces like this, when you see that there is community, I'm really inspired. I don't feel alone anymore. And my request is that because we're talking about the economy and the system, basically, what we've spent a good chunk of this morning talking about is the system, my request is actually to hear more personal stories, because there's so much collective wisdom here. What I would really love to know from everybody here, because I haven't, right now for me, the most precious commodity in the next few days is time, and in-person time that I won't get from you all, maybe, I don't know when. And what I would really love to do is hear your personal struggles with money and break that barrier, break that taboo that we don't talk about. How have the five of you dealt with money in your personal lives? What has money meant for you? How can we learn from your struggles with money? How have you survived? How do we survive? How does everybody in this room who's chosen to take a different course, how have you guys dealt with money? Because it's something we never get to talk about. I struggle with money. I still have to pay a rent. And for me, that directly feeds into the greater system. So just hearing those stories and being able to connect and say, you also struggled with money? I had no idea. I want to connect like that. If that is a request that could be honored. It's a very humble request. But
I can say something about that, share a story with you. Can you hear me? Okay. Closer? Like that? Oh, now it sounds so loud. It's not. Okay. I was involved in organizing the first religious summit at the United Nations in the year 2000, which is where I met Master Shen Yen and many of the great religious leaders, Dayananda Saraswati, teachers of these two. And we reached out to first time religious leaders were gathering at the UN. Within a few months, we raised $3 million. Put on a grand affair. All the foundations came forward. But because it was the UN and they wanted the high officials, there were very few women. One or two. Amma was there, Amritananda Mai, and a few others. And so the women weren't happy, and they came back to me, which is the origin of my work, and said, we didn't get a voice here. Let's organize another summit. We went back to Kofi Annan and asked him if we could do a summit of women. And he said, yes, go to Geneva, the Palais des Nations, and that's how all this, Maichi came to the first summit. There was 12 monks and Maichi, and she and I bonded right away. And so we went back to the foundations to raise money, because I said, yes, we will do this. UN has given us the blessing, we're going to do it. We started sending out invitations. every foundation closed its door. We had no money. We had only a few months, invitations were out, and we had no money. And I went into panic mode. And suddenly, because I'm a long-time meditation practitioner, I said to myself, all I have are my spiritual resources. That is the only security in the world. And if you take one lesson away from this, the only security is your spiritual resources. Everything else can go. People can die, economies can crash. If you have your spiritual resources, you work through it all, which means that you don't get attached to the outcomes. It all is going to work out because you're doing not for yourself, you're doing for the good of the whole. I had no personal agenda. The women at the summit had asked me to organize a follow-up, and I naively said yes and started to do it, but I had no need to do it for myself. And so I started praying to Mahalakshmi, which is how she came into my life. The money poured in from children, $13. We're sending this for the women, to $100 from businesswomen. The entire thing was organized by individual women who somehow heard about it through a network. Instead of raising $3 million, we raised $350,000. We had 750 spiritual leaders coming to Geneva, women and men, and it was much more successful. The first religious summit, there was so much competition between the religions. Who spoke first? Who spoke longer? Who couldn't speak? Everybody walked out. The Vatican walked out because we said something about reverence to earth. China walked out because we couldn't have the Dalai Lama, but we had other Tibetans up there. So it was huge fighting. The women had no power. There was no fighting, nothing to protect. It was the most, and that was the beginning of all this work. And so it was a great lesson, and we continue to operate this way because all of our funding comes from spiritual organizations. And we never know year to year what we're going to have or what we're going to do. And we've learned over the years because we have no personal agenda in this. If it's of benefit, then we will continue to do this work. If there's no money, then we will stop, which means that we're not needed anymore and we can go sit on the beach somewhere. So write a book. So I think my experience has taught me, and I came to this work after I had had many years of meditation practice, that is the only thing that one has to fall back on. Because the change will come, whether we cooperate it or not. The current system is simply not sustainable. So it's not a matter of, are we going to change or are we not going to change? Do we want to change? Do we not want to? It's going to happen. Our mothers in the universe, Mother Nature, is going to say, come children, you need to change the way you're living now. So it's going to happen. So we can fight it, we can be fearful. And that's one of the greatest challenges now, is to deal with fear. And fear can only be dealt with, and I think we need to get into that a little bit longer, because we feel it very much in America right now, that there's so much fear, and it's being used politically, this fear. And fear of the other, fear of all kinds of things. And unless people can recognize that it's an illusion, there is no reason to have fear. Because the universe is a benevolent one. There is abundance. And so I think, and knowing how to tap into that abundance, and that's a spiritual exercise, because you can't have any ownership of it or control of it. It has to be through surrender. So I think maybe Lisi and I can get into that more in the afternoon session, of how you can surrender into the flow of Dharma so that you can free yourself from fear.
Great. I just like to talk a little bit about that too. In the process of doing this work too, my teacher, Master Sheng Yen, also we've about trying to find funding, creating the fund so that all of you could come here, and he believes so much in young people. And in the process of doing this, even when I'm doing this work too, it's the same thing because you're going against the system, right? The system, right? That was how things evolved, and that's how our worldview has been created. Worldview meaning this is how the world operates, and this is your place in that, and that's how you're supposed to operate. And if you don't do it that way as according to this agreement by everyone, then there's pressures from other peers or from systems, from institutions that will pressure you into, obedience, right? So, but we are situated, again, like I keep saying this to a lot of people, at a very unique time in human history, where it's a breaking down of a system that served its purpose during the Industrial Revolution, but we're moving into a birth of something else different. Breaking down of a lot of barriers that we have seen, countries, race, religion, all of these things are breaking down because young people of the world right now are questioning these. They don't connect in that way that was in the past. There's a lot of conditions right now for something beautiful to emerge. You could continue business as usual, like what Mihir said too. If the Earth's temperature rises 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, I'm going back to science here, you're going to trigger a lot of positive feedback systems on the planet that is going to contribute towards more global warming, more climate change that you can't stop anymore because Mother Earth is going to take over and she is going to release all the carbon dioxide, all the methane gases into the atmosphere because we have allowed and we have planted the seeds for our own destruction so that we cannot survive on this planet. So we're at a point where a lot of things can be done. But what you want to accomplish and where you are right now, it's never a straight path. That is my discovery. It was never a straight path. Fundraising, getting people on board, and telling and sharing with people about, this kind of passion, and you see this opportunity. Some people will go like, that's not going to work. It's not going to succeed. You can't change the world. This system is, like you're saying too before, like what He was saying. We're too big. You cannot fall. They don't think it's possible. It's because we have been packaged into these boxes so neatly that we can't even imagine outside of this box. But it's time to destroy it. That's why we started this session with something radical, breaking down. We're going into a very difficult topic. We've thrown in some stuff to turn everything upside down so that you step outside of this box, so that we could disconstruct in order to rebuild something else beautiful. So in the path of doing this, I discovered it's never a straight path. So sometimes it requires for you to open up. That's why Dina was talking about spiritual practice. I went back into my spiritual practice. Because if you think it's a straight path, it's very ego-centered. I want to get there, and I want you, and you to follow me to get there. I can tell you it's not going to work. You cannot recruit people this way. You can only invite people, enroll them into this purpose, into this higher purpose, right? So then you have to open yourself up to look at what is missing. Fill in all those missing pieces so that everyone together, as a clockwork, there are different gears, there are different screws, there are different parts that would make this happen. So then it's not you on a mission, but you're inviting everyone to be part of this big story, of this big transformation. That is my discovery on this path of doing it. Because when I was doing it alone, I thought I was alone. It's like what you're saying. And I think a lot of you might think this way too. You're alone. And it's a struggle. But then the sense of, you know, what you want to accomplish becomes very strong and you're very attached to it. But when you open yourself up and invite everyone's stories in, then it's no longer about you. It's about something greater than you, and you're willing to transform yourself, to change yourself to include all the narratives. That's my discovery when I'm doing this. And I try to also inspire in other people. Change is not just yourself. Change is everyone, inviting everyone in.
So one of the reductionist concepts which has been the cause of this breakdown is to see everything in terms of matter only. So you look at a tree and you see only the chemicals involved. You put in more chemicals in the roots and the tree grows faster. But we do not see that the tree is also a conscious, living, sensing being. Animals are not only conscious, living, sensing, even they're thinking, they love, they have complex societies, sometimes more complex than human beings. But if you eliminate all that, then the scientist today in the lab says, yes, we observe animals having a reflex reaction, which we are not sure is a real emotion or just a reflex in the brain. You know, that's your materialistic perspective. In reality, what we see is animals are more loving, more caring, more collaborative than most human beings. Now, what has happened is in our educational system, we've been taught, all this has been removed, and we've been taught to look only at the material reality. And so the vocabulary we were taught to use is natural resource. How many times have we used that word today? Every time I hear the word resource or natural resource, something in me winces. How would it be like if tomorrow, let's say, the earth was dominated by some other species and they looked at human beings and said, oh, those are natural resources that we can use? How would you feel? And we've forgotten they're living beings we're speaking about. They're not resources. In the educational system today, we have added one more subject. We call it ecology, in which you are taught, children are taught, your children are taught, you have been taught that trees are good for you, therefore you should plant trees. Trees give you oxygen, which is good for you, therefore go and plant trees. Have you heard that? Have you accepted it as a teaching? And do you realize what you've been taught? The actual teaching given to you was, because it is good for you, you should plant trees. If it was not good for you, then you could destroy the trees. It does not matter. The only thing that matters is what is good for you. That's the real message that's being given to your children. Compare that with what we would have taught in our homes 200 years ago, or still in the indigenous traditions. We tell our children, those plants, they are your brothers and sisters. I remember once as a child when I was about to pluck a leaf after sunset, my mother stopped me and said, wait, the plant is sleeping. Would you like your hair to be pulled out when you're sleeping? Interesting. In our indigenous traditions of medicine, in Ayurveda, you're taught to ask the plant for permission before you can take something from it for your medicine. This sense of connection and the whole world to be living beings has been erased by the reductionist materialistic science. And this is one of the corrections we need to bring about. And these are simple, small corrections. They're memes, they're central like a gene. You correct this and there's a huge chain reaction that follows. One of the recent significant developments was that in New Zealand, the tribes which used to look upon the rivers as a living being were finally granted the right to accept the river as a living being and to have a representative for the river to speak on its behalf in the legal and political framework. That's a huge step. You realize? What it means if tomorrow we have representatives for all these living beings who speak on their behalf. Human rights is so silly, so trivial compared to the reality of the living being that is Mother Earth. And we don't speak of rights anymore. Does Mother Earth speak of rights? She has responsibility as a mother. Let's speak of human responsibilities instead of rights, and the whole thing will shift from taking to giving. Okay, these are simple, small memes which will change the whole framework.
Okay, thank you. First, we're going to wrap up and then break. Okay, so thank you. Right, so what's happening right now is we're uncovering something. Some of these unexamined assumptions of, again, commodities, of separation. This is what this culture is, culture of separation. That, you know, we feel like we need to protect ourselves. So it's all about me, 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 me. Now, how do we create this culture of connection? It's a different story. It's a different narrative. And it's about connection. And we'll talk about this. Dina was saying that we should break so that everyone can get drinks and use bathroom and just stretch, a tea break, right? And then we'll come back in 10 minutes? Or 11:30, come back at 11:30 and we will continue this conversation.
Actually, come back at 11:25.
What time?
Come back at 11:25.
Okay, come back at 11:25. Okay, and we'll continue this conversation moving into connection. And we'll just close with a moment of silence to just digest and honor what we've shared. All right, thank you. Let's go for a break, tea break.
Okay, so the next station would be the stadium, okay? After you have the refreshment here in the cafeteria,